next speaker for today is the founder, chief futurist, and executive director of the Center for Engaged Foresight. He is also the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists, a faculty of the Development Academy of the Philippines, and a lecturer of the University of the Philippines National College of Public Administration and Governance. Help me welcome the Vice President and Chief Futurist of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, Mr. Shermon Cruz. Sir, good morning.
Thank you very much, Christine, for that quick introduction. Now, let me just share my deck now and put that in presentation mode. Okay. There you go. So, I think what I can contribute best here is to present a future outlook or some perspectives about ways by which education might transform in the future, both from the short-term and immediate future, in the immediate or long-term future. But let me begin now by doing that. Let me just, and I'm having some difficulty seeing my screen here. It's kind of pretty weird. Okay. You know, when we talk about education futures, one of the most critical, crucial drivers of change, other than the pandemic, is our technology. And technology futurist Marshall McLuhan once said that we shape our technology, and thereafter our technology shape us. And embarking from that framing are the questions that I would like to ask today. Can Philippine education and systems transform in the heat of an impending or massive shift and the adoption of a frontier technology like satellite technology, metaverse, the transition by the year 2040 and full transition to super AIs by 2050? Another one would be, of course, the integration of biotechnology, and among other technologies are shaping, many of the global industries, like the Fortune 500 companies that will definitely define the future of work, and nation states, like, for example, the OECD and Dubai has been discussing about ways by which human augmentation play a role in the future of learning. And of course, with those initial drivers of change in mind, is that how might we situate ourselves, our learning systems, and our spaces or learning spaces in a hyper heterogeneous, hyper localized, and let's just say hyper borderless world of knowledge acquisition. And going back to the present, of course, we all know that education leaders and systems are overwhelmed by the implications and impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And some thoughts came to my mind. Is deep change possible as far as the Philippine education system is concerned? If we say that deep change is possible, how might a transformed future of Philippine education look like, for example, in 2030, in 2040, and in 2050? Isn't the future another burden, given that we are fighting fires every day? And being the firefighters that we are, and given that the crisis will perhaps in one way or another become, for many countries, in fact, we've been trying to figure this out in the futures community, that for some nation, it could become an extended present. That if they won't be able to transcend themselves from this extended present, it could go as far as the year 2050. And of course, given the fact that COVID-19 has blurred the way we do, the way we learn, and the way we live, and in the absence of clarity, we have to ask ourselves, aren't we moving into a default used or business as usual future? As far as education future is concerned. Are changes in the Philippine education futures in the post-COVID-19 situation or scenario incremental? Or is it adaptive? Is it transformative? What is our change management style or design or framework. And if you try to think about the transformed future education, that would necessarily require the emergence of new metrics and indicators. What might be the transformed, or what might be, or what could be your metaphor of a transformed learner or a learning system? Let's just say by 2030 or 2040 or 2050. What might our ways of knowing reality be in order for us to evoke and enable ourselves to inform and drive a future wherein the future's education landscape transformed in the future? What are the stories that we wish to create in the process? Is our desired future of a transformed Philippine learning and education system? Let's just say if your transformed Philippine education future system was a news headline, by the year 2030, 2040, or 2050, what might that news headline be? What are the types of systems and policies and strategies and programs and innovation that we need to create and enable in order for that news headline to occur? That by 2050, let's say by 2050, or CNN or ABS-CBN or some local newspaper would say, okay, this is how a transformed future education look like, in terms of ranking, in terms of metrics, in terms of its impact and influence to a wider global world of knowledge development. So how might we innovate our way to create the Philippine transformed future scenario? And then with that, it's something that we need to figure out as far as Philippine education future is concerned. And another question that I would like to ask and post here is that how might a nature first, tomorrow-driven, indigenous values-based, or zero-based knowledge learning look like pedagogies by 2050? Those are the questions that I would like to share and perhaps pitch in as some sort of a provocation in order for us perhaps to start imagining the kind of future that we would like to create. So I'm done with the questioning the future part, and I would like to present some weak signals here. Weak signals, some signals of change that are emerging from the future that are not necessarily a trend right now, but they are emerging, and definitely if we lose sight of these emerging issues, it might create a problem or a concern to the future of Philippine education in the process. Or if we perhaps create some sort of an intelligent systems that enable us to spot the weak signals and use that as an asset, to generate wicked opportunities, then perhaps we might be able to get there. But we need to figure out first, what would a transformed future of Philippine education look like for us? And I'll be sharing also as well that the Philippine Futures Thinking Society is coming up as an event next month, which is, of course, the Futures of Technology, Learning and Work 2050, the first Philippine Futures Thinking Summit. I will be presenting 3 scenarios of education futures. So if you would like to see that, I encourage everyone to please attend the Phil Futures Summit. So these are the weak signals of change that I was able to spot and has been, mapping in the last 2 years. And then the conversation that I've had with the OECD, the Asian Development Bank, and the Dubai Future Foundation, which I'm fortunate to be a part of as an advisory board, are these things. One is human augmentation. Human augmentation is all about ways by which, technology designers and inventors, including, venture capitalists, are looking into ways by which we could transcend the boundaries of human intelligence and amplify our cognitive power through virtual and augmented realities, bioengineering, and the neurosciences. So in this, if we try to use these weak signals, some sort of a leverage point to anticipate the potential future of a global futures education system, because definitely Philippine education system has to link and align with the global narrative, otherwise we become irrelevant. And this scenario would imply that if human augmentation become real, and that there are economic policies, funding, and regulations that enables, countries and nation states, particularly, in fact, in developed countries, is that I don't predict, but I assume that human learning efficiency skyrockets. by personalizing learning and embedding smart techs in our brains and bodies via human augmentation. Imagine the world by 2050. How might the future of education look like when citizens and nation states and companies and corporations begin, to roll out these initiatives that enables human augmentation to become more efficient both in learning and work. And another weak signal that I was able to spot is the emergence of what we call the imagination-based learning. According to the Minister of the Future of Dubai, he said that imagination and ideas are the currencies of the future. And public investment trends in knowledge development, smart technologies is already there. Yeah, we're trying to build a knowledge development agenda all over the world. And in fact, they are now saying that public policy is actually knowledge development. They are game changers. So if we try to reframe public policy as knowledge creation methodology or pathway, then perhaps we are now in a transition wherein the world is trying to create an imagination-driven future world. So what would the implications, both tacit and explicit implication of an imagination-driven future economy or world or investment look like from the perspective of course, using Philippine education futures as a lens? What kind of reforms or adaptive shifts that we need to discuss now and have a conversation about in order for us to participate in this future economy of Education Futures 2050. And another weak signal that might perhaps, I'm not predicting because no one can predict the future, is the transition to the self-actualized economy has actually begun. There are 150 million digital knowledge and learning content creators in the world today. And the Great Resignation will definitely drive this emerging trend. Imagine if the top Fortune 500 companies de-emphasize formal education. What would that look like? What are the implicit and explicit impacts, as far as education systems and education industry is concerned? Novelty is enlightenment. Another one is, this is a weak signal that we need to look into and have a conversation about, is the shift from a service-based economy to a memories-based industries and jobs. The global pandemic apparently has amplified, fast-tracked the unbundling of work. And the unbundling of work, there are a lot of conversation right now about this ways by which work are unbundled. And in fact, this is actually related also, to the emerging technology, what we now call the metaverse. The unbundling of work could trigger or might end the era of service-based jobs and accelerate the shift to memories or memories-based jobs and economies. I'm going to explain that later on, but I would like to show to you some weak signals of change that perhaps we need to look into. So I would perhaps highly recommend to the Education Futures team of the Department of Education, to set up a team that will look into this, on a daily basis, or perhaps put that in your agenda, because foresight and futures really is not just about developing scenarios or mapping the drivers of change that are shaping the trends right now or impacting the immediate future, but more importantly as well is to explore and unpack the unknown unknowns. And of course, metaverse. We've just seen on Facebook that they might change the name. I'm not sure if that's true, but I have to check that again. But there are many technology futurists in the US right now that are having conversation about this emerging technology of metaverse. So in here, we are living the industrial age behind, that has informed and shaped learning and work and industries in the last 200 or 300 years. So we are now saying goodbye to old factory models of education and learning. And we are perhaps emerging into a future wherein things, including learning, immerses itself into by using metaverse platform. Remote work and remote learning provided the impetus for massive virtual investments. And how might that look like for knowledge as well? So in a conversation that we had recently with the Minister of Malaysia, and they have actually been investing on futures and foresight on education in the last 15 years. And 10 years ago, they have had the conversation about this idea wherein the professor, the researcher, and the teacher become knowledge entrepreneurs. And how do they emerge as knowledge entrepreneurs? They must learn how to make, think, and imagine. So knowledge entrepreneurs create a bunch of makers together to form a community of co-creators working to build new value propositions for companies and industries. As far as the future of work and, of course, wealth generation is concerned. So in this scenario wherein knowledge entrepreneurs emerge, you will have professors and teachers who doesn't rely or are dependent with formal education systems. It might even be a possibility that you will have massive shifts wherein, imagine if professors and teachers were formally or were previously full-time teachers and professors in universities or primary and secondary education, and then suddenly you have a gig type of knowledge creators or professors in the future. What would that imply as far as Philippine education system is concerned, wherein you have an Uber type of teachers and professors in the process? If you try to look into this is actually all over the world right now, and professors are actually creating their own universities, right? So in this knowledge entrepreneurial world is that each and everyone, gains wealth, generate wealth by building their own experiences, using their own experiences as a wealth generator in their own creative way. The internet has allowed us to store, knowledge and learn and transact by exchanging them. Let me just show to you some weak signals as well. I play, therefore I am. Reality compared to games is broken. Futurists from the IFTF, who is a colleague as well, said that reality doesn't motivate us. It wasn't engineered to maximize our potential. It wasn't designed to make us happy. Games are. And that is why there is currently a massive investment going on in the gamification of learning. 24 billion anticipated investment in dollars by 2024. So, especially now that augmented and virtual reality will be much cheaper and accessible as technology companies massively invest in creating a platform wherein you're not just a participant in the learning process, but rather you are in the virtual world yourself. And there are a lot of things in that. And many platforms are emerging wherein learning become gaming. And another thing that I would like to post here is what they call in Europe, the quaternary sector. We have seen, the future of work has always evolved. This has been evolving, since time immemorial, and apparently we've seen the shift from the primary, the initial machines that we've been using in the 18th century, to the introduction of the manufacturing, to the tertiary, which is of course currently the world that we are in right now, and perhaps what we've been preparing perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years is the service-based economy and the automation of everything. But we are currently migrating to the quaternary sector, where in data intelligence stage and algorithms generate work, and it becomes your learning system and education system, because the work, technology, and learning has to be integrated. So when you try to imagine the future of Philippine education future, try to use these weak signals and combine them together. Definitely you will, it will give you an opportunity to push the boundaries of possibilities. And another one is, when we talk about innovation, is because of the digital world, it's too fast. And there are some companies and corporations in the world that, okay, how might we be able to negotiate, speed in the adoption of technology and ensure that we create innovations that are meaningful and actionable. Remember that currently we've been having a lot of conversations about well-being, right? And a concept that has been, generated for a few educators and developers and technology and futurists as well, including designers, is the idea of intentional or intentive learning, or patient learning or innovation, which eventually, as the quaternary future emerge, where everything becomes data intelligence and algorithms, and imagination plays a big role in creating a transformed future or habit or ecosystem of education, is the emergence of what they call the new craftsmanship. And this idea of new craftsmanship, if that is that each and every one of us become a maker of knowledge, not just a consumer of knowledge, but a maker of knowledge. So we make, then we think, and then we imagine, like how an architect or a technology development works. So patience is a virtue. So if we want to co-create learning spaces, how might we be able to design, perhaps if you want to consider this, learning spaces that enables patience to occur and insights to emerge. And last but not the least, of course, I would like to accentuate this because this has been the conversation that the UN and the United Nations Framework for Climate Change has been doing, and has been the conversation that been having in South Korea in the last 3 and 4 years is the nature first consciousness, because we are moving into climate change world. Imagine what Philippine education system and futures look like if the global temperature is 1.5 and hits at a max of the 2 degrees by 2040. What would that imply as far as face-to-face learning is concerned, or digital or remote learning as well, because houses will be impacted by in a world wherein droughts are prolonged, typhoons are stronger and more frequent, among other things, that hits Asia almost every year, year in, year out. So what would the nature first education system look like? Perhaps we might figure out how to reawaken, each citizen's sense of belongingness as far as when it concerns about, sustainable ethics and environments. And then, of course, another one is indigenous values. How might we harness indigenous consciousness, like envisioning and developing a seven generation agenda for education futures? And align this with frontier technology is an emerging learning trust. They're not going to fund education future or agenda unless perhaps, in fact, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the ADB, including the OECD, is having a conversation about the possibility of, will we make foresight or future a condition for loans? What are your scenarios about your future education? Are you looking at 7 generations ahead? Is your future of education agenda and the resources that we put into the ways into our project fair to future generations? And of course, long-termism. There is an increasing interest, and it's becoming actually mainstream. I would say we are now in the golden age of futures thinking. Perhaps that's my assumption, is we're seeing a pivot to futures literacy and strategic foresight. And in fact, the UN Secretary General recently, released the UN's common agenda in strategic foresight is a critical agenda, a critical imperative for the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. So where do we start? I would say that we need to look into the opportunities and the possibilities wherein we try to drive gamification into the learning process. There is a mass exodus from reality to game spaces. We are opting out from reality to play games. And that's according to Edward Castranova, who's an economist, and that education gaming is projected to reach $24 billion by 2024. Is gamification a critical imperative to our future of learning? And then some snapshots of what we can do on Monday morning. So if you try to link, the 2050 possibilities with this week's signals in mind, and if you try to combine this week's signals together, you might generate, multiple scenarios about the future of education. And then once you make it hyper heterogeneous or plural, and then we decide what is our desired future. In Germany, when they do a preferred future agenda that is really critical to the future of Germany, they make a referendum, about the future of, for example, real estate. And recently they just voted in a referendum about the future of real estate. And, just Google that and you will be amazed at how Germany is actually trying to shape their future together by voting on it. So there are 3 things that I would like to accentuate in my presentation. One is intelligence and imagination. Try to figure out how might we be able to enable ourselves, our systems, to increase, this opportunities to enable ourselves to have this, opportunity for kids to become new craftsmen, right? And science and technology is key. So some recommendations, in fact, some of them, I would say 70% of this recommendation is a result of the Work Technology 2050 report that the Millennium Project did in the last 3 years. And I'm quite fortunate to be a part of this network and group. Is that, you know, the global workshop that they did is that make increasing individual intelligence a national objective of education. The future of education is not just literacy or functional literacy, but intelligence. STEAM, you know, create a hybrid system that allows for self-paced learning. Increase focus on creativity, human relations, self-employment, ethics, and values. New craftsmanship, master craftsmanship rather than mastering a profession. Unify formal and non-formal education. Create a curriculum at all levels that normalizes self-employment. You know, if you want foreign direct investments to increase, these are the things that we need to have a conversation about, because you know these are actually enabling ways by which you can attract foreign direct investments that are projected towards creating global economic future. A more future-oriented, innovation-driven, nature-first, lifelong learning pedagogies in schools. When it comes to science and technology, we need to figure out how to integrate simulation-based learning in multiplayer environments in a virtual world by 2035. You know, develop science and technology innovation labs, make it really active. Teach science and technology foresight. This is very important. Accentuate coding and AI literacies. In a future workshop that I did for US cities on the future of smart cities, they're going to set up, these cities will set up a center of for AI literacies and AI excellences or excellence. You know, read science fiction, integrate science fiction in the way we teach science and technology. In a workshop that I did for the National Academy for Science and Technology, apparently everyone realized that the science and technology platform or format learning that we have is that we haven't integrated science fiction in the process. So we need to integrate science fiction, read and learn more science fiction, because it enables us to create new learning imaginaries and more. So I would like to, of course, just for a few minutes, invite everyone to attend the Futures of Education, Work and Technology Summit. We've invited the best in the futures and the foresight field. The European Commission will be there. The United Nations Development Program will be there. UNESCO will be there. Hopefully the World Health Organization will join us as well. The OECD, we've invited some folks. And of course, our futurists and foresight practitioners in the Philippines and our institutions who are critical to the achievement of Ambition 2040. We've invited all the national government agencies who are currently releasing the invitations as well. It will be November 12 to 24, and that's for it for me today. If you want to know more about it, please go to www.philfutures.net. Hiraya Manawari po.
All right, thank you very much, sir, for that very interesting talk and for sharing new information on the future prospects of transformative education, especially as we strive to move in the direction of open economy. Once again, sir, thank you very much. Now let us begin the open forum. I'd like to encourage everyone to post your questions in the chat box, and we will take note of those. Try to raise as much to our panel of speakers. To those of you who are joining via Facebook Live, do post your questions in the comments, and we will try to get as many of them as we can within the allotted time. I noticed we have also friends from other organizations here. If you want to ask questions, kindly press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and our secretariat will coordinate with you. So joining us today as panelists in this forum are Undersecretary Nepomuceno and Professor Shermon Cruz. Also, we would like to acknowledge the participation of none other than the Director of Center for Research and Communication, Dr. Bernardo Villegas. Sir, thank you for joining us in this forum. We're honored to have you. All right, so now let's move on to the first question. So I guess there are a lot of questions already in the chat box. Everyone is eager to know more about the current developments in our education sector. So from an anonymous attendee, sirs, we have a question. Does this future, do you think, does this future of education low-key espouse, don't go to college, learn life skills instead? So one of our viewers, participants, asked if the future of education low-key espouse, don't go to college, learn life skills instead. So I guess he's asking about the more practical, yeah. So any one of you, sir, would like to answer that query?
Yeah, I'm not specifically clear or clarified with the low key. What does that
I
mean? I'm
guess
sorry.
maybe just trying to he or she might be trying asking for clarification, sir. Maybe if you are saying that we should just focus instead on skills rather than on the theoretical aspect, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not espousing for it. It is an emerging issue, that it's being deliberated, in different parts and sectors of the world, especially, developed countries and Fortune 500 companies. In fact, some of the Fortune 500 companies, like, if you try to look into the qualifications of their global directors, it does not require a formal education. It only asks you for experience like 15 and 20 years. Right? It does not require. In fact, some of them, like I've seen that in EY, in PwC, it's no longer a requirement to work for PwC to have a formal education. If you have the experience of working as a data processor or a knowledge creator or a technology developer, you'll get hired. You'll just have to present your work, right? But would that mean a potential future wherein universities perhaps would de-emphasize formal education? Stanford is talking about it. Imagine if the top 5 best universities issue a statement that we're now de-emphasizing formal education. You go to Silicon Valley, it's not a requirement. And we're moving into a highly knowledge-driven world wherein making things becomes, a resource and asset, to participate in the global market. Now, let's look into the interest. I haven't been in a conversation with those people involved in foreign direct investments, but we'll see, right? So imagine in the event that, let's just say by 2030 or 2035, the universities of the world de-emphasize formal education like Fortune 500 companies. What would that look like? What would be the impact as far as Philippine education sector is concerned? It's a question that I'm trying to ask here and post, right? Is that possible? I'm not predicting it. It could be or it could be not. But what if it occurs? It's low probable, it's emerging, but high impact when they occur. Like your COVID-19 pandemic, right? Or the 9/11 in 2001.
All right, thank you so much.
Comment? Yes.
Yes, sir, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, well, Professor Cruz distinguished between the immediate future and the long-term future, and that's a very important distinction. Immediately, the Philippines has to address this big mismatch between what our educational sector is producing and what industry is requiring. For example, there's tremendous shortage of carpenters, of plumbers, of technicians for the Build program. And this is because we have become obsessed with college diplomas, more influenced by the American mentality than the European mentality. And definitely, we have to de-emphasize among parents and children the desire to acquire a college diploma. And we have to invest a lot more, whether in formal, non-formal, or formal ways, in developing technical skills at all levels. And I have been advocating a lot of emphasis on TESDA type of schools rather than universities. And in fact, even to the extent, and I will address this also in the light of what Professor Cruz mentioned about 2030, 2040, when we worry about human augmentation, gamification of education, that in the meantime, however, we have to separate the mass of students we are educating, especially at the level of basic education. We have to emphasize that at the level of basic education, there's a human right to acquiring all the knowledge and skills necessary for integral human development. So we're not going to focus on skills, but after basic education, we now have to channel a lot more of our people towards technical skills. Also, Professor Cruz mentioned that we have to adapt technology to people and not vice versa. I'm a little uncomfortable when I hear a lot of businessmen and economists talking about Industrial Revolution 4.0. We have not even gone through Industrial Revolution 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and we're emphasizing too much artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things. Those are for what we can consider our intellectual elite, who can come from the lower income classes if we have a very good scholarship program that will support our children of poor people to go to the best university, UP, Ateneo, La Salle. But in my opinion, and China is already doing this, we have to introduce what Europe had for a long time, numerus clausus, to make it clear that going to university is not a right. They have to deserve it. And the majority in Europe for a long time were going to technical schools. They were not going to universities. No, they were not going to Oxford, Cambridge. These were very elitist universities, but open precisely to people coming from low-income classes. So this is the kind of restructuring we should introduce to the Philippine educational system. The government has to budget more than 2% of GDP in basic education. The average in this region is about 4 to 6%. And we only heard of physical infrastructure. But more than that, improving the salaries of our 1 million teachers is vital. We will be invaded by all these countries that have suffered from demographic suicide, including China, who will be trying to import our teachers. If we don't improve the conditions of our teachers, we will lose them as we'll be losing nurses, caregivers, and so on and so forth. And that is why the government has more than enough to budget 5-6% of GDP for basic education. And I think Professor Cruz gave the strongest argument to bring in foreign direct investments, because it's the only way we can prepare our universities to have the facilities, especially in research, that will have the necessary human resources by 2030, 2040, 2040. Artificial intelligence, there's no way even our Ateneo, La Salle, UP can be at the same level as Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, NUS, Korea University, Tokyo University, if we don't get them to partner with our local universities to bring in not only capital, but technology and their PhDs. And I think we really have to remove that restriction about foreign groups investing in our universities. You know, when even the most developed countries around us, Stanford, to put up their campuses, here we are telling them, we won't allow you. And that is really why this effort to change the Constitution, because in the Constitution, we cannot allow foreigners to invest even 1% in a tertiary educational institution. So I'm very glad all the information that is presented here really is now focusing on the very intent of the Department of Local Government to somehow pave the way for removal of that provision against foreign investments.
Yeah, yes, and just a quick pitch interjection into what Dr. Villegas mentioned is that as a Monday morning strategy, perhaps the Department of Education or the DLG and the local government, can engage in a conversation to find out ways by which, they can integrate and emphasize craftsmanship at the local government level. Like some sort of community learning spaces, co-creation, DepEd, local government, industry, and focus on craftsmanship. And craftsmanship does not necessarily mean high tech. It could also mean low technology. So yeah, in fact, low tech is an emerging issue as well. Because every time when we talk about Industry 4.0, akala natin, we thought it's all high tech, but it's not necessarily mean high tech. It could also mean low tech, which is of course innovating ways by which you can access this technology, especially for the global south and in the country like the Philippines.
Can I add to the conversation with respect to the question on whether we should now focus on opportunities for lifelong learning, not necessarily rooted in formal education. My thought is that certainly we will still need a basic education system, a strong basic education system for the foundational skills of all of our learners. And in higher education, institutions of specialized for specialized skills and knowledge of our learners, and eventually forming part of our human resource. But certainly there will be a broadening of the venues for acquisition of knowledge and skills, whether it is in industry, in self-learning opportunities. And what is needed is to provide such, as I mentioned, broader continuum of learning spaces, not confined to the formal education system, but across various contexts and various spaces, both physical and virtual. And in relation to that, obviously, there is also a broadening of recognition of qualifications outside of formal credentials. And it is something that you can acquire and will be recognized by the markets more and more, however it is acquired. So in other words, there is going to be not there is going to be, but there is already a broadening of such a sources of knowledge and skills and other competencies that are valued by society and the markets. And there is going to be a greater and greater recognition mechanism, so that it is not a replacement, but a more of the formal education system, but more broadening. But certainly I think that the basic education will continue to have a major role in ensuring that the basic competencies needed for to prepare for various forms of knowledge as they live through life will still be necessary, and we need to strengthen it in the near and future period.
All right, thank you, sir.
May I follow up that, Undersecretary Manaluan?
Go ahead, sir.
Definitely, formal education, all the way up to senior high school must be a constitutional right and mandate. So when we say about shifting to non-formal, we're talking about post-secondary. Every Filipino has a right to acquire the critical thinking skills, effective communication, and ability to interrelate one science to another, which are needed for lifelong learning. So we're talking about lifelong learning only after they graduate from senior high school. We cannot introduce informal, non-formal before they get their high school degree. So that is a must. That is what the Constitution provided. In fact, we discussed this a lot, and some people wanted to even include university education as a human right. We said, we cannot afford that. And that is why another important issue is the government should not put up more and more state colleges and universities. Let's invest all of our resources in the UP system, make them as good as Korea University, Tokyo University, all the best universities in Asia. Then allow the private sector to do the tertiary education. And as I said, once foreigners are able to partner with the Ateneos, La Salle, Silliman, and so on and so forth, the government can use part of its funding to support the scholarship of the serving poor people so that these universities do not become elitist. So I think that's the kind of partnership. We're not giving enough attention to the private universities that can qualify to be among the best in the region. So that's the way I see. Make sure that every Filipino can go all the way up to senior high school and acquire precisely the skills they need to learn until the end of their lives. People will not be able to learn if they don't have those basic skills. And in fact, there is a book called Robot Proof by an American university president that says that the ones that will never be replaced by robots, no matter how developed Industry 4.0 becomes, are the ones who have what I said: critical thinking skills, effective communication, and the ability to relate one human science to another. Those have to be in the curriculum of the Department of Education, and that's where the Department of Education has to be challenged. Develop a curriculum that will make sure that every Filipino is able to get all those skills before they graduate from senior high school.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for your
siguro a
insights.
minute lang, Christina, no, about
Okay,
formal
sir.
education. No? Because if you try
Yes,
to
sir,
look
before
back
we proceed.
into the history of formal education, how it evolved over the years, and how it ended up today, the current reality of what formal education is, it's that it's really heavily structured, closed. It follows a particular system, that has perhaps evolved over the years, pero it's too structured. But then you are moving wherein education is reframed and focused on learning, which is fluid, network, open space, and choice. Of course, the formal education system will be there, as Dr. Villegas have said, it's a right. But then there is also choice, right? There's a parent choice, there's a choice of the person, and individual. So it might not be mandatory in the process, but then the narrative about learning is that us human beings trying to figure out how to learn better and how to, the UNESCO agenda of learning to become. I think that is what self-actualization is all about, learning to become. Because degrees does not necessarily lead you, to a process of learning how to become, to achieve that self-actualization, right? Now, if formal education wants itself to become relevant, then it has to be adaptive. It has to be agile. Because otherwise, it will be invisible in the process.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, follow the top.
Right.
Yes,
Yes,
that's
sir.
very, very significant, because when I referred to the European system as being a lot more practical, they were the ones who developed the dual voc approach to teaching people, both formal education and the skills that they need in industry, by simultaneously introducing students to academic learning and on-the-job training. That's why I call it dual voc. We now have some models in the Philippines, Dual Tech in Canlubang, the Meralco Polytechnic School, the side school in Cebu. They are excellent practitioners of dual tech education. So we have to try to get this system not only in technical skills, but also in academic areas where we can get the private sector to cooperate with our basic education institutions in making sure that the training is not purely academic, but they already are actually being exposed to real life situation. That's a very important point of Professor Cruz.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for all those clear messages regarding the issue of skills and formal education, okay, within the sector. So perhaps we can move on to the next question. There is an interesting question posed by one of our participants in this Zoom webinar. Could FDIs compromise the political security of the country? So any one of you from the panel, please, would like to answer to that?
I think I will, because I was the one in the Constitution that was the minority saying that we need foreign direct investments. Unfortunately, at that time, the majority from left to right were still with the Filipino first mentality of the 1950s. And that is not a problem. As long as we have a strong regulatory body, as China has. China has accepted all the Amazons in the world of Facebook, but take a look right now at how they're disciplining all of these foreign investors by the right regulation. So it's now incumbent about our government to regulate these foreign investors when they're here and not permit them to do whatever they like Facebook, etc., etc. So I'm not afraid if we have a good government. So that's the big question. Are we going to have the right regulators? We now have the Philippine Competition Council. It's doing a good job making sure that foreigners do not monopolize certain industries. So we can do the same thing about any untoward thing that we expect foreigners to do. That can be addressed by regulation, not by excluding them from competition.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone from the panel would like to add? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to add on Dr. Villegas, we're moving into a hyper-connected world there. You know, the connectivity in the world is getting hyper. It's so confusing, it's so overwhelming, but then it's also enabling us to create new opportunities. And all transactions definitely, shifting to the virtual world. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, among other those kinds of new types of exchanges, and some other exchanges are emerging, right? And including the banks, economic transactions are shifting into the virtual world. But then, of course, it is critical and essential as well that we have to be smart, right? We have to be smart. We have to shape regulations that put us at a competitive advantage, right? Yeah, we have to do it. This can be negotiated. This is something that we should not fear, right?
All right.
So yeah, this has to be negotiated, right? All of these things, and then we have to be smart enough. I think we have to be smart.
Mm-hmm. All right. Maybe Yusek na po mas... yes, sir.
Yes,
Go
can
ahead,
I add to that? Because there was a questionnaire, and some of the respondents said they want it all in education, but not in media, not in advertising, and not in telecom. Well, as Professor Cruz said, the world is so interconnected that you cannot distinguish anymore among telecom, media, advertising, and education. They're all in one big sector. Take a look at what's happening in the developed world. Amazon goes into telecom, telecom goes in Netflix, etc., etc. So the moment you start saying media cannot be foreign owned, you actually close the door. Telecom cannot be foreign owned. You actually close the door to industry 4.0. So all must be open up because they all belong to the same industry.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yusek, anything you'd like to add, sir?
Yes, as I mentioned in my opening message, the Department of Education is very much open to continuing discussion on this in the context of reviewing the constitutional restriction on the ownership and control and management of educational institutions. One other a constitutional principle in education is the recognition of the state of the complementarity of public and private education, except that with the limitation, the private is confined to a nationality restriction. But as we look into the area of knowledge creation, we really need to expand the sources of such that includes a broader investments and greater diversity, greater choice, and avenues for innovation. Now, if it is about the safeguarding educational standards, then that is something that can still admit of regulation and supervision on certain probably closely held national norms, but that is not necessarily incompatible with opening up the sector.
All right.
Yeah, and
Thank you, sir.
yep, just quickly, and this is where scenario become relevant and really important, you know, because of course, like technology, foreign direct investments is a double-edged sword, right? You know, any opportunity naman or an emerging platform or issue is always a double-edged sword. Like, let's try to have a conversation of you know, what is a disowned future scenario of foreign direct investments that we do not like to occur. We have to have a conversation about that because it's not all beautiful, right? So it's quite complex. We have to have a conversation of an FDI future that we do not want to occur. That if it happens, you know, like everybody distance themselves from it because, you know, the implication was negative. And then we also have to have a conversation about what is our preferred future of foreign direct investment future. You know, that has to be vivid. You know, perhaps it's not always clear, but we need to have a conversation of a preferred future scenario for foreign direct investment in the Philippines and its industries, so that we can create the right, you know, narrative in shaping the public policy strategy, what we need, you know, to create in the process, because these are important issues, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can
the
I
weird
give an
as
example?
well, and the weird as well, and the weird. You know, those that we haven't anticipated needs to be anticipated.
Can I give an example of Professor Cruz scenario of what we have to think about? It's already happening in China, and especially I'm sure the audience are very familiar with the Korean wave all over the world. In China, they accepted a lot of Korean entertainment groups, etc. Now, Xi Jinping is clamping down on Koreans looking feminine, looking, you know, he said, we don't want that to influence the Chinese culture. You don't want boys looking like girls and so on and so forth. They can regulate that, and they've stopped some of those Korean shows. Well, that's a perfect example of what can happen with foreigners coming in. But as I repeat, we have to be as strong as Xi Jinping in saying, this is what we want China to be. We don't want you to influence this. And, you know, Xi Jinping is not a saint, but he's doing a lot of good things right now. For example, he's trying to really make sure that the tremendous inequity between the rich and the not so rich will be removed. So he's going after billionaires and so on and so forth. Those are things which a good government should be doing. And that is what we hope we will produce. I don't want to be too political, on May 2022.
All right. Thank you very much, panel, for answering that question. Truly a balancing act in a highly globalized world. So moving on to the next question. The LCP program of DepEd is highly commendable. I would just like to share the impact of the pandemic, not only on the learning issues of students, but the condition of their mental health as well. How can this be addressed and its impact lowered? What support is being done to vulnerable sectors like persons with disabilities? So this question is from NCDA, from Ms. Delfina Bakir of NCDA. Maybe we can first direct this question to Yusek Malaluan, sir.
Yes, certainly this is a very challenging times, both for learning delivery and for coping mechanisms, not only for our teachers, but also for our learners and our parents as they participate in education. And certainly learners with disabilities are even doubly marginalized given the special attention that is needed for their education. And if you have trained teachers in our special education programs, but are not able to see the children face to face, then there is a much greater role that their house members have to play in the education process. So there has to be a very strong communication and a special effort for learning delivery in this case. Some of the actions that we're doing are the converting of our self-learning modules into accessible formats. For example, for video lessons, ESLMs with Filipino Sign Language component. We are also doing training of parents and community volunteers in assisting learners with disabilities. And we have allowed the hiring of what we call a learning assistants. And this is deployed to assist the learning process of the learners with disabilities. But this is what I mentioned, that there is as part of the impact of what happened, we see because of the challenges, the inequity with respect to household resource, and even the children's own skills and capacity for self-directed learning, there is a portion that are left behind and are suffering learning loss. And this is something that we will have to embark on a recovery period for this over the near term. Even as we look at the areas, as I mentioned in my opening message, on areas where there are learning gains that can assist us in transforming education. With respect to the mental health, we do have programs through our Bureau of Learner Support Services. We have a school health division that, and even our DRRM. We need to take into consideration that the department, because of the disasters that we have been facing in the past, has quite a history already and track record of addressing this even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're continuing those programs. And then, of course, our determination to, at the soonest time possible, be able to reintroduce face-to-face classes, even at this time of the COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Thank you for addressing that question. Anyone else from the panel would like to answer? Okay, so we move on to our next question. What kind of economics will be taught to students if our schools are foreign funded? Will they be taught the skills needed to critically engage with government policy, or will it just teach them to quietly agree with existing macroeconomic policies? Because they aren't experts, just workers. So, anyone, sir, would like?
Well, as an economics professor, I can say that whether it's foreign-owned or local-owned, economics has to be taught. What should be emphasized is what theories are actually backed up by evidence. I think economics should be as empiric, data-based as possible. So it doesn't really matter whether it's owned by a foreigner or a Filipino.
All right.
Yeah, siguro
Thank
a
you,
thought,
Dr. Villegas. Yes, sir.
yeah, a quick thought is one of the suggestions that I've made is to normalize self-employment. You know, we have to emphasize that. You know, in a research done by the Millennium Project, you know, it was a research that covered like around 30 countries from different parts of the world for 3 years. And in one of their scenario of the three scenarios that they had was the emergence of a self-actualization economy. You know, economy is digital now. It's virtual. You know, Ryan's World is earning like $38 million a year, that young kid, just by creating content for kids, right? And then someone can just develop a dating app for 50 or 60 years old, and then you can earn as much as $5 million to $7 million a year. You know, so this is something that we need to look into, because, you know, economy is becoming digital, right? And if you have an internet and you have that basic, you know, capacity or capability or competency, and you know what you like, set it up, right? Participate in the global economy. You know, it's not just about industries anymore. It's also about human agency, you know, like influencing the future of the industry, changing the conditions of change. You know, a professor like the Khan Academy, imagine that, right? Like several years ago, he's got like around, I don't know the numbers, but millions subscribing to his courses, funded by Bill Gates, among other things. So a person now has the ability and capability, you know, the opportunity, you know, to participate in the global market. So self-employment, and then building those necessary skills and capacity like coding, you know, it's very critical. Like human relations, networking, creativity. Those are the kinds of skills that we need to learn now.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Delgado, I'm sorry, I have to leave. I have an appointment.
All right,
Yes.
sir. Okay, before we answer, all right, sir. Due to time constraints as well, maybe we can get any parting messages from any of you. Any parting message?
Well, let me
from
just say
sir?
that,
Yes.
well, I was part of the group that framed the Constitution, and we gave a lot of emphasis to the human right to quality education. And as we know, quality education is among the top SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And we have to relate that to attaining not only a sustainable development, but inclusive growth. And we cannot afford now to have another divide, the digital divide, which we now see very clearly. People from the lower income groups cannot learn effectively because they don't have the resources. No, only the well-to-do can learn right now. So we have to address that. And that is why it is so necessary that we devote more and more to education, public education, basic education. So among the other infrastructures, not only the school buildings that were very well described, but also digital infrastructure that will make it possible for the lower income students to learn. Because I'm sure that the new normal will already combine in-person teaching and online teaching. That's already a permanent situation, but we have to address the lack of digital infrastructure among the vast majority of pupils. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Villegas, for joining us this morning. We appreciate your presence and participation, sir.
Thank you.
We would also like to ask any closing messages from Professor Cruz and Yusek Manaluan, sirs.
Yeah, if I may, that's why futures thinking, scenario development, and strategic foresight is a critical component, for economic development in the 21st century. Each and everyone must develop that competency and capability to anticipate. Each and every one of us has anticipation is a natural capacity that each and every one of us has. It's like your logic. It is natural. Anticipation is natural. But for some people, it is not mature, right? And I think that is a competency capability that we need to do. That is why we have at UNESCO what we call futures literacy. It's like you're reading and writing. Once you learn, you learn how to read and write and count numbers. It could bring you anywhere, right? And in the same manner, futures literacy has been trying to do that. And as far as the future of education is concerned, in foresight, We don't predict the future. We scan possibilities, and then we use that possibilities to inform and develop the strategies we need to create on Monday morning. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Cruz, for your insightful talks this morning. Yes, Undersecretary Malaluan.
Yes, as early as when Secretary Briones came to office in 2016, she already flagged the quality of education as the foremost and biggest challenge of basic education, and probably also the rest of the education system today. And we are determined to address that. We have Sulong Educalidad, as I mentioned. But as you can see with the presentation of Undersecretary Sevilla, there is a duality that we have to deal with, and that is there are still so many gaps in education financing, and we're even talking about last mile schools even as we speak. And sometimes the constraints of the short-term planning does not afford you the luxury to look farther ahead. And it is for this reason that Secretary Briones has directed the formation of an Education Futures thinking program in the Department of Education that would be able to have the flexibility to think beyond the annual constraints of planning and budgeting. And it is in its nascent form at the moment, but we wish to grow this out to first with our education leaders, and then our teachers, and at the point that we are able to infuse this to our learners, because we agree that certainly it changes the planning parameters if you would go out or move out or expand your planning horizon and not be trapped in the parameters of short-term and annual planning and budgeting. The most is really a forward plan of 3 years, and even our medium-term development plan are on a 6-year cycle. This is the first time that an outgoing administration of the Department of Education will be leaving behind, for example, a basic education development plan all the way to 2030, just to ensure some level of continuity with respect to the focus on addressing the challenge of quality in basic education. So a final note is I think we need an acknowledgement from everyone that the formal education system will not ever be sufficient to meet especially the very dynamic learning requirements of our children. Learning happens in different places, and if we are able to recognize whether it's media, whether it's household, whether it's communities immediately outside of the sphere of the home, they all contribute to the learning process of the children. And so we look at this as habitats that must provide a supportive environment for the continuous learning of students. So we hope that we can move towards that shared responsibility for the education of our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Malaluan, for representing the Department of Education this morning and for providing us substantial information and updates on the prospects of our education sector. Again, maraming salamat po. Thank you, sir. So we really got a lot of questions this morning. As much as we want to address all of them, unfortunately, we don't have much time left. So if you have any more messages, or you can coordinate them with us after this session. So again, thank you all for being with us. Today, we appreciate the presence of our speakers and panelists in this session. We would like to once again express our gratitude to Ms. Pamela Dayan Carbonell, Ms. Tonette De Jesus, Undersecretary Malaluan, Undersecretary Sevilla, Professor Shermon Cruz, and of course, Dr. Bernardo Villegas. Also, we would like to thank the participants, members of the press, for being with us in this forum. Now, just a few reminders for all of our participants before we end this session for today. Post-evaluation form links will be sent to your email, so please help us improve more of our activity. All presentations will be available on the G Drive, so kindly check your emails after this session so you can browse and review. Certificates will be sent upon request, so please wait for the post-session email we will be sending so you can have your requests sent. Registration for the next session will be sent to your emails, or you may check our Facebook pages for the link. Should you want to review the whole session, you can watch the live recording on our Facebook pages flashed as we end this session. So, once again, thank you very much for being with us today in this forum. See you all keep safe, everyone. Unfortunately, I have to stand corrected. This will be the last session for the Econ Fora. We would like to thank all of you for participating in this webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. So, on this note, I would like to thank all of you and our partners, especially for your steadfast participation in this advocacy. Thank you very, very much. With that, I would like to greet you all. Good Friday and have a blessed weekend ahead. Keep safe, everyone.